From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Second only to The Weather, the new Netflix drama Adolescence is cropping up in conversations, it seems, everywhere.
I'm talking Netflix's Adolescence. You may or may not have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, go and watch it.
Finished watching Adolescence, and the whole way through my psychologist's brain was ticking, so I want to talk about it. Obviously, it's beautifully written, amazing acting, beautifully shot, but the way that they touch on masculinity, identity development, parenting, unity, familial dynamics.
Yes, and at home we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good.
Jamie, I want you to listen carefully.
Do you know a girl called Katie Leonard? Yeah? Describe each other as friends, then.
Is she dead, then?
Why would you ask her?
This 4-part series following a 13-year-old boy accused of murder is proving to be a critical hit, with its one-shot cinematography particularly exciting reviewers. But it's the issue at its core which has got people talking. What are kids looking at online, absorbing in our culture, and what is it doing to them?
Dad, you're not reading what they're doing. It's a call to action by the manosphere. 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. You must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way.
We've done nothing wrong, have we?
Is this Here Today, Gone Tomorrow television, or a timely spotlight on what is actually happening with young boys? The story today, the truth behind the drama Adolescence.
I'm Jonathan Dean, the executive editor for interviews for Sunday Times Culture.
Adolescence seems to be the one thing that everyone is talking about at the moment, to the extent that walking around town, I have heard snatches of conversation about it. I've just got on board the bandwagon. For the uninitiated, Jonathan, what is it?
It's a programme that's made by Stephen Graham and his wife, Hannah Walters. They have a production company called Matriarch Productions, and together with Brad Pitt, Plan B Productions, and Netflix, they've launched this...
Brad Pitt?
Yes, so Brad Pitt runs a company called Plan B, who've been responsible for an awful lot of incredibly good work over the last, say, 20 years. And I think he knows Stephen Graham, probably from something they've worked on before. Anyway, they wanted to make something together, and Stephen's idea, and it was all his idea in fairness, was about telling a story about what exactly is happening to our kids online. And in a way, it's actually quite a simple show. I mean, it's not really a spoiler to say that it's about the murder of a teenage girl by her classmate, and Stephen Graham is the boy's father, and the show starts with the boy's arrest, and it kind of goes over 4 episodes. It delves into what happens to the school. It includes psychologists. It includes what happens to the family. That's kind of it. This isn't like a particularly knotty, twisty thing. It's not a whodunit. We know who did it. It's a very rare show that is sort of desperately trying to lift the lid on various things that are going on with our lives. And it wants people to talk about it, which, as you said, they are.
And part of the allure is the way it is done as well. Each episode is one shot over, an hour or so?
Yeah, so it's a one-shot technique, and it works, I think, really well, because the point of it is to show that life unfolds. We don't really have any control over it. Like, life can't be edited, life can't be cut, life can't have certain bits left on the edit suite floor. It's about showing us that life is basically one continuous take, and the point of that with this show is that every single person, from the family to the school, local community, is completely shocked by the murder that happens. So it's a gimmick, yes. It always has been a gimmick to do one shot, because obviously, would the show be as successful if it was hundreds of shots? It probably would, because I think it's thematically more important than it is stylistically. But there's something about this that does grip you. And I think kind of the way it has people so heavily choreographed to pop up in different rooms and then take over the scene, it's very clever. But I think what's key is it never feels clever, which is the best way to describe it. Yeah.
And Stephen Graham, who you mentioned there, who, as you've explained, plays the dad, is also one of the creators of the show. You've been speaking to him, haven't you? And what did he say about why he wanted to do something, as you said, about what is happening to our kids online?
So he and Hannah, obviously, they're parents of 2 children. I think they're in their late teens. They got 1 boy and 1 girl. And I think just generally as parents do, they observe how their kids are and how their kids' friends are. And also they were watching the news, and he was noticing that up and down the country, for different reasons, there were attacks and deaths happening to teenage kids.
There was a young girl who was stabbed to death in Liverpool. And I just kind of thought, wow, I think it was just before Christmas Eve. And, you know, she was stabbed by a young lad. She was only 13. And we had the young black girl in southeast London who was at the bus stop, and her boyfriend stabbed her to death. Then there was the young trans girl up in Leeds who was lured to a park by 2 people and stabbed to death. And I just thought, wow, what's going on here? Why is this happening?
He was just interested in it in the way that I think a lot of parents and other like non-parents are. So he wanted to investigate it. And his point was, you know, who's to blame? Is it the kid? Is it the parent? And he wanted to just kind of set this up into a show. And that was his idea.
And it's slightly shocking how ordinary the family seem, by which I mean it's not a obviously broken or troubled home.
No, and he was incredibly specific about this to the extent that, and actually I don't think this is brought up in the show, but the boy's mother, he said he wanted her to have a job, like a good job, and his idea for her job was she runs the furniture department of John Lewis.
I wanted his father to be a hard-working man who was up at 7 and didn't get back home till 7:30 at night. Do you know what I mean? And who had his own company. So we had a couple of lads working for him as well. And I wanted the mother to be someone who had a really good job. And my ideal, so what I created was she, you know, mum was the manageress of John Lewis's furniture department. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They took 2 great jobs. They had 2 good parents.
Yeah. Working
really hard and running a household.
And then obviously Stephen Graham's character is a plumber. And they're just sort of a good, hardworking, quite affectionate family. And also he was very keen to emphasise that the dad's never laid hands on the boy. He's never hit him.
I wanted to look at that concept of a boy who does this horrendous act, but yet, you know, mum's not an alcoholic. Dad has never hit him. He's never raised his hand to the kid. Dad's not a violent man. The boy has not been molested by Uncle Tony. And he's not had any of those experiences that we can blame the family for, because, you know, look, and I'm being completely honest, that judgmental element of myself and in my head, when I saw this kind of thing on the news, instantly I was like, we blame the parents. Even subconsciously, we blame the parents. We instantly blame the parents. But I wanted to look at it from the point of view of, what if it's not the parents?
What do you make of the reaction to this? Because it has really got under the skin of the country in a way that shows which we see written about a lot in the past, your Successions, your White Lotuses, don't really, because, well, it's, you know, it's a different subject matter, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, not a lot of people are actually watching those for all that we talk about them, whereas this seems to pack a punch and is genuinely on in lots of households.
I think it's extraordinary. I think I actually also spoke to Hannah Walters and some of the women from the show, and she said it's clocked up 93 million hours of viewing on Netflix since it came out, which and she's not just saying this as the producer, it is breaking records. I'm slightly staggered. She admitted she's slightly staggered by the reaction. I genuinely think the reaction is because this has been something that's been on people's minds for such a long time. I mean, and it's been tackled in bits and bobs like over the years, but nobody's really sort of gone this explicit into the sort of problem of, let's say, Andrew Tate, which he's mentioned in there, and the manosphere and toxic masculinity and how men are online and how they deal with women. this is so only about that and so explicitly about it. It's kind of forced people to have conversations. I think the really interesting thing is that parents are having conversations about it. Parents are talking to their children about it. There was a really good piece in the Times a couple of days ago about like adolescents are also enjoying adolescence. And so there is a sense that you've gone multi-generational, which is how shows become hits. You have to appeal to more than one age bracket. So it's done that. And it's just creating a conversation. I think more to the point, it's allowing the conversation. People have probably wanted to talk about this for quite a long time. Teenagers are scared. Parents are scared, but they're kind of almost scared of talking to each other about it. And if there's a hit Netflix show that every single person is talking about, it kind of gathers that steam.
And mention of it has cropped up in unlikely places, hasn't it?
Yeah. So it was mentioned at PMQs.
Everyone is talking about Adolescence. It highlights online male radicalisation and violence against girls. The creators of the show are calling for screenings in Parliament and schools to spark change. So will the Prime Minister back this campaign to counter toxic misogyny early and give young men the role models they deserve?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Yes, and at home we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good.
Stephen Graham and Jack Thorne, who wrote it, Stephen had the idea and then Jack Thorne sort of pulled the idea out of Stephen's head. They're being called in to discuss it with government. And I kind of thought, and I said this to Hannah Walters yesterday, I was like, yes, this is all great, because I think this is stuff that really has to be talked about. But I was a bit like, shouldn't they have been talking about it before? The problems of what's happening to teenagers online is clearly not a new thing. And Hannah said, which I thought was a really fun line, she said, yes, but it's amazing what 93 million views on Netflix will do to sort of push something up the priority list.
Well, CC, Post Office versus Mr. Bates.
Exactly. It's a very similar thing.
You hear a lot from parents that have been quite worried watching it, putting aside the fact that it's very entertaining television. I mean, did you leave it freaked out?
It's not an optimistic show. I think.
I've got a friend who just will refuse to watch anything that's, quote, sad. So when we were talking about it, he said, is it sad? He's like, yeah, well, I won't be watching it. And this falls into that category.
I texted a couple of friends the other day because I was just interested in if they'd seen it or not. And they were both like, to be honest, I just haven't found the moment to sit down and watch it yet. There's nothing in it really that offers any hope. And I sort of say it in a sort of slightly delirious way. And I think the hope is a bit more of a tangent. It's the hope that the hopelessness creates a discussion.
We start with the easiest question. Can you tell us your name? So we've got on tape you introducing yourself, all your names and who you are.
My name is Nathaniel Cole. I'm a workshop facilitator and researcher focusing on masculinity, relationships and sex education for young people.
So with a job like that, what on earth must you have made of Adolescence? And also, I guess, the conversation that it has started as well.
It's actually quite weird, if I'm really honest. I've spent nearly 10 years doing my work, and for the most part, it's felt like that's kind of been in the shadows. So when a show like Adolescence comes along and it creates a moment, it can be quite shocking because I'm in my world where lots of people talk about this. And now more people in the general public are being brought into the world that I already live in.
But for you, it seems realistic, what is happening on screen.
Yeah, I think it's a portrayal of some of the most extreme forms of violence that we can see and have seen.
Yeah, and we should be clear, what they talk about in Adolescence is obviously an extreme case. Not all troubled young men or young men who are very online end up murdering people. There is, south of that, just lots of people maybe struggling in many different ways. What do you think is the broad issue going on?
For me, the broad issue is we are not doing a good job or a good enough job of showing a variety of ways that young men and boys can live as. I think there's a very narrow view of what a man is and what a man should be. So boys are striving to fit into a very set and precise mold that not many can actually go into. Like the amount of boys I work with that need, as far as they're concerned, need to be over 6 foot tall, or need to earn £100,000 a month, or need to be very muscular and all these sorts of things. And they all need, according to them, they all need to be entrepreneurs. And they're growing up in the age of, I don't think we could have, well, I didn't know that this is where social media and me being on MSN would end up, you know? Young people are having to deal with it, where it's a core part of a lot of their lives. And I think all of that, like when it's put together, it breeds and creates these ideals that lots of people are striving to, but very few can achieve. And as a result, you have a lot of anger and a lot of distrust, and that gets channeled in the wrong directions.
Yeah, maybe we'd have none of this if we were all just still on MSN Messenger, who knows? Tell me about your work, because you run these workshops, don't you, with boys of this age?
Yes.
How did you get into doing that?
Yes, to be honest, I attended an event on masculinity at a university, and that was during my mid-20s. I'm 34 now. So I went to that event because I had a lot of questions. I guess the feeling I had in my head was, I'm not a man. I'm not what a man should be. But my honest self was also knowing that I know I am a man because I exist. So when there's an event where men are encouraged to come together to talk about masculinity and their relationship to it, I was really interested in that. And someone was delivering a workshop on violence there. And he suggested that they needed more typically Black young men to deliver this work, because they were often working with boys in inner city schools and academies in London. So yeah, I signed myself up and didn't look back. It did coincide, unfortunately for me, with losing a friend to suicide. And that was a big wake-up call for me, particularly because I was also struggling with my mental well-being at that time too. And that continued for the next 4 years, really, if I'm honest. So I have this big traumatic event in life. Friend takes his own life. And then I've been encouraged to talk to young people about what being a man is. But yeah, I've worked for a lot of different great charities and organisations that are doing great work.
So what do you do then day to day? Take me into one of these workshops. How many people have you got around you? Who are they? What age? And what on earth do you do with them?
Yeah, so I think one thing about adolescence is for people that don't work in schools, they're like, oh my God, it's so shouty, angry and busy and chaotic. And with workshops, we try our best to reduce that chaos. So the first thing is we're moving all the tables out of the way, and we reduce the numbers as well. So for me, ideally, I have at most 15 kids to work with.
What kind of age are these boys?
13 to 15. We don't get much access to year 11s because of GCSEs.
Well, fair. But do you sense them coming into the workshop in the first instance thinking, oh, we've been told there's a man who'd like to talk to us about our feelings for 3 hours. Save me. And do you have to work a bit to overcome that?
Yeah, and sometimes we're working to overcome the fact that the boys might be missing PE, for instance. For lots of them, that's their favourite lesson. But we are not doing what you normally do when you enter a classroom. So that's the first message that their boys need to be in tune with. One activity that we run is we ask the children who they're inspired by in their life and why. And we had a boy at first say he was inspired by his dad because his dad works really hard and he knows his dad loves him, but his dad, has to travel for work and he understands. And then halfway through, as we're going round the circle, lots of people are mentioning their mothers, aunties sometimes as well, sometimes older brothers. But then that same boy interrupted, like the next person that was supposed to speak and said, actually, I want to change it. I want to change it to my auntie instead, because my dad wasn't actually really good to us and he wasn't he's not a good man. And my auntie was actually the one that looked after me. My auntie was actually the one that helped me and my mum, actually helped raise me. And then he started crying. And to have a boy go from a moment of saying what he thinks he is supposed to say, and it's probably saying what he actually wants to in that moment. He wants to be proud of his dad. He wants to be inspired by his dad. But then hearing other people talk about, essentially, for a large part of the women in their life, the people that are there with them every day. And it was a big moment because for the rest of the boys, they've never been in a room where there's more than 10 people and one person's crying. So they all have this instant kind of choice to make of like, how do we support? And, they start hugging him and like clapping and everything. And for me, it was a beautiful moment because that brings them all together. It lets him know what he's feeling is okay and it's valid. And it doesn't become there was no phone, there was no Snapchat that got pulled out and then sent out around schools, right? And I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from. It's like, if I do this, or if I do something that's embarrassing for young people now in the UK, it exists beyond that moment, not just because of the rumours that can spread, but also like the digital footprint from it. And so there's this fear and reluctance to show what you think, show what you feel, show what you actually like, because it can become a much bigger issue compared to when I was in school, where it would exist for a week, maybe. One of the activities I love doing is I ask boys to tell me about how they used to express themselves when they were 5 years old and how that's changed to how old they are now. I run this with college-age students, so between 16 and 19. And they very quickly realise there's a big difference between how they showed love or hate or shyness when they were 5 compared to the age they are now. And what always comes up for them is the fact that there was someone to be those things with or show that to when they were young, whereas now, when it comes to showing love, it turns into like buying stuff for people. Or when it comes to showing hate, it's about fighting someone or, kind of raging in your room.
How on the nose do you take it? Do you ever show a picture of Andrew Tate and say, what do we make of him? Or, the idea of feminism, what do we think about that, boys? I mean, how down the line do you go?
With Andrew Tate, I think kids are bored of having to be told about him. Okay. So instead I think what a lot of them still do is probably still watch him, but don't talk about it now. I've had boys tell me that they originally liked him because he annoyed girls and women, and they thought that was funny. So with Andrew Tate, I don't use his images or anything. I think there's no point because the boys will still give me all his talking points anyway. The typical things I see is that women are liars, girls are liars, they get away with everything, they're gold diggers, and they're not genuine, they're not loyal, all these sorts of things. And, I always find it weird, especially things like gold diggers. I'm like, guys, you're 14, like what? You're not supposed to have anything at this age. And then equally, they do want to pay and show that they can pay for stuff like first dates, and it gets very odd. But yeah, typical values is like, to be really blunt, it's like they know men are their equals or boys are their equals, and beneath them are women and girls. Like, I see it all the time with how they will engage with teachers that are women. I try my best to name what they're doing and bring that to the surface so that they can be challenged by themselves and their friends by it. And
I put a name on it. Say something like that is sexist, what you've said, or what have you.
Less so that is sexist, but I'll be like, this teacher's came into the room, you've immediately been rude to her, like, why has that happened? Tell me why.
And do you diagnose the problem as being what they're all watching? When you talk about the influences on them, is the bulk of it, maybe not even Andrew Tate, but just people online reinforcing this kind of behaviour?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're a big part of it. The frustrating thing is for boys, when they are trying to get advice or looking for advice or things that they'd like, the people that are showing them the things that they like, whether that's about sports or mental health or anything like that, those people are also giving them the message that is feeding them misogynistic talking points and distrust towards women. So the boys are having a positive association with someone that is giving them a workout because that's what they want to do at that moment. But that same person is feeding them information about seeing women as assets or trying to not be in the friend zone and all these sorts of things. So what I'm trying to push back at or get them to understand is if you have a positive association with someone, it doesn't mean they are not causing harm or they cannot cause harm. You know, we talk about there's lots of footballers and famous people out there that have a variety of sexual assault cases or rumours about them. And the boys always will, their first instance is no, they are lying, she is lying. And it's about understanding that just because someone is good to you or does good things on a football pitch, for instance, does not mean that behind closed doors, they can also harm, at the very least, one person. And that takes some time for them to get their heads around because I don't think anyone wants to believe that someone that they like is a bad person to someone else.
Short of cloning you, how do we solve this?
I think the media and I guess social media to an extent needs to do a better job at platforming a more balanced views. Or so schools will do things like drop down days every term at the most, where they'll have a time off schedule to talk about other stuff, and that's normally when organizations like the ones I work with get brought in. And for me, I think actually this sort of work needs to be a part of the regular weekly schedules that's in the schools. And unfortunately, it needs to be invested in more, and we need more funding for that. That should, I think, come from government. I think that everything that we need is actually already out there. It just needs to be invested in and prioritized appropriately. Because at the moment, with poor economic outcomes in the country and everything else we're seeing, this problem, this issue of misogyny and I guess the underlying currents that's mentioned of like male supremacy is only going to grow, right? So it's like if you don't tackle it and fight it with good intervention programs or funding already existing interventions and making them more prominent in young people's lives, then I don't think any change will happen. But it can happen. And also I think with adolescence, just to come back to the show, what probably a lot of parents are worried about or shocked by is the idea that when you give your child independence, they can go down a wrong path. And that's always going to be a risk. But I guess I'd just like to say that, you know, parenting doesn't stop. As much as teenagers will want to push boundaries, you know, seek short-term gains and like seek independence, you can still facilitate how that goes. A lot of people have been talking about reducing phone time, screen time. I think the internet's been great to make communities and find like-minded like individuals and friends, but we do have to learn how to be around each other a bit more, I think, and just put the money where it needs to go.
But people, I guess, like me, watching Adolescence and being mildly terrified by it, I mean, you're saying, yeah, you should be scared or not?
I think one thing about Adolescence is, while Adolescence tackles the worst that could happen, there's still a lot underneath that. There's bullying, there's isolation, there's loneliness, there's lack of self-belief, and there's disrespect towards women and girls. Like, all of these things are very real, and that's what's actually happening, a lot more common. So I think it's not that you should be scared, but you should care.
Nathaniel Cole, and also we heard from Jonathan Dean, who is executive editor for interviews, culture and books at the Sunday Times. More from Jonathan at thetimes.com if you have a subscription. There's also a piece on there about what teenagers themselves actually think about the series, a piece that Jonathan mentioned. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. This episode was produced by Taryn Siegel, the executive producer was Kate Ford, and sound design and theme composition were by Mauro Lassetto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.